For some reason I didn't get dressed up for my Daredevil review, so for this video, I'm Daredevil. Hello everyone and welcome to another rewind review. You know what, I can't do a full video with this on. Oh, that's better. Hello everyone and welcome to another rewind review. In this video I'll be taking a look at the spin-off movie from 2003's Daredevil, and that is Elektra. Released in 2005 and based on a Marvel comic book character, the movie sees the resurrected assassin Elektra having a change of heart which leads her into a war against an evil crime syndicate. Directed by Rob Bowman and written by Zach Penn, Stuart Zickerman and M. Raven Metzner, the movie stars Jennifer Garner, Kirsten Zine, Goran Visnich, William Lee, Natasha Malvi, Chris Ackerman, Bob Sapp, Edson T. Ribeiro, Kari Hiroyuki Tagawa and Terrence Stamp. Now be honest, up until the release of Deadpool and Wolverine, most of you had probably forgotten about this one. To be honest, the first time that I discovered this movie was purely by chance. I must have been about 11 years old or something like that, and by that point in time I had already seen the Daredevil movie. Yes, I know I was too young to see it, and I was looking through my dad's DVD collection. He used to have a gigantic set of DVDs. He used to basically have like full wall-length shelves just full of every kind of movie that you could possibly think of. And one day I was going in there, I had a little look, I was trying to sort of find something to watch, and one caught my eye, and it was this movie. It was Elektra. And I saw it, and I saw the title, and I went, that can't be the same Elektra from the Daredevil movie, can it? And sure enough, it was. I had absolutely no idea that this movie had been made, and I was a big fan of Marvel as a kid. I mean, I still am. But even back then, even though I wasn't old enough to actually watch those movies, I was more than aware that there was 3 Blade movies. I knew about the Punisher movie. I knew about all the different movies that had been released over the years, or more like the 2000s era of Marvel movies. But I just don't know how it was that I missed this. So I decided to watch it, and I'll admit that at the time, I did kind of enjoy it. If you ask my mum about it, she'll say the only reason I enjoyed it was Jennifer Garner in that costume. I won't say she's completely wrong, but there were genuine reasons why I did enjoy it. And because 2025 marks the 20th anniversary of this movie, I thought, you know what? It's time to go back and revisit this. Especially since over the years that this movie has been released, it's garnered shall we say, not the best reputation. In fact, this movie is often seen on lists made of the worst comic book movies ever made, alongside Catwoman, Batman and Robin, X-Men Origins, Steel, and Daredevil. Now, if you have seen my review for Daredevil, you know that while I don't think that it's an amazing movie and not without its problems, I do enjoy it, and I wouldn't say that it was that bad, especially the director's cut. And when it comes to this movie, Elektra, I would say the same thing. So what happens in this? Also, I do need to give a little spoiler warning if you have not seen the 2003 Daredevil movie, just in case you want to see it. After being killed at the hands of Bullseye, Elektra is resurrected by a blind mentor called Stick. But still consumed with violence and anger, her training is stopped and she turns to the life of an assassin. But after being tasked with terminating a father and his young daughter, Elektra has a change of heart, and in doing so becomes embroiled in an age-old war between the forces of light and dark, as she now has to protect her former targets from a mysterious group of supernatural assassins known as the Hand. So already based on that synopsis, you can tell that this is a far more fantastical and comic book oriented movie compared to the much more grittier and grounded Daredevil. And this is something that I did and still quite do like. It embraces its comic book roots a lot more than most other Marvel Comics adaptations were doing at the time, and it does make this a little bit more fun. With the exception of Spider-Man 1 and 2, most of the films based on Marvel properties at this point in time had been pretty grounded, like the Blade trilogy, Punisher, X-Men 1 and 2, and even Ang Lee's Hulk. To be fair, Ang Lee's Hulk is the only comic book adaptation to actually use comic book paneling to do edits and transition changes and just basically having like 5 different camera angles of the exact same scene. It was an interesting decision. I mean, it's unique, I'll give it that. Elektra fully embraces the wackier and more over-the-top elements from the comics and features a lot more of a supernatural side. We get to see people with superpowers, we get introduced to Stick, who wasn't even a thing in Daredevil, and we also finally got to see the Hand. Now, I will admit, there are definitely some elements of this movie that don't quite work as well as I think that they probably could have, and I do think that there are some things that do come across as a bit cliched. And if you are somebody whose only exposure to the character of Elektra is the Daredevil movie, then seeing all this much more over-the-top fantastical elements and superpowers and all this other stuff is going to be quite jarring, because it literally comes out of absolutely nowhere. Don't forget, this movie is not completely standalone. It's a full-on spin-off movie from 2003's Daredevil. So I do think that you do need to see that movie in order to understand some things that happen in this and where Elektra is as a character. During the finale, part of the fight with Karigi involves all these white sheets flying around them both, which parallels the rooftop fight from Daredevil between her and Matt. Plus, there's even a deleted scene which featured a cameo from Ben Affleck. But even with all that said, the the tone and the feel of this movie is vastly different to Daredevil, and that's very apparent within the first few minutes, where we basically get this big opening monologue sequence with a montage telling us all about this treasure. And during this opening monologue, it's very heavily implied that Elektra is this legendary treasure. But for some reason, the movie completely shifts gears and it decides, nah, bead power all the way. How the hell are beads more dangerous than Psyblades? Even the movie can't explain it. Anyway, plus we also get to see Elektra pursuing a severely underutilised and wasted Jason Isaacs in, to be fair, a pretty cool sequence. It's shot well, good pace, good lighting, slight suspense, and it does set Elektra's story up pretty well, minus the fourth wall break. That was weird. It is a decent sequence, and I do think that if the rest of the movie had been more like this, I think that it would have been received a lot more positively. When it comes to the characters that feature in this movie, it's a bit of a mixed bag for me. So let's start off with the best, and that is Jennifer Garner as Elektra. I've said it multiple times on this channel, I really like Jennifer Garner as Elektra. I like her performance, her screen presence, and the way that she handles herself in the many different action scenes, which she does get actively involved in. She is awesome once again, and now given the chance to actually lead the show, I do think that she does step up to the occasion. She was an interesting character in Daredevil, but she wasn't given anywhere near enough focus. So having her getting the chance to actually be front and centre of this movie, I thought was really cool. We do get to see a bit of her backstory and her training as a child, and we also get to see a little bit of the aftermath of her resurrection. But it is brief, and they don't actually give a reason for why it is that Elektra is resurrected, she just is. Plus, for some reason they decided to retcon her backstory regarding how her mother died just to give Elektra a personal conflict with Kurigi, the main antagonist. Just why? It makes no sense. Also, when did she develop OCD? That's just kind of thrown in this as well. Anyway, I do like the dilemma that Elektra is presented with in this movie, where you slowly see her being consumed with violence and anger. She's slowly starting to cut herself off from other people, and she's trying to justify it as well. There is one scene in this movie where Elektra does get quizzed on why it is that she does kill people for a living, and her response is, because it's what I'm good at. That is dangerously close to Wolverine's catchphrase, because I'm the best there is at what I do, but what I do best isn't very nice. Why is it that the only time he says that in any of the movies it's the worst one? Anyway, there is one line of dialogue that did get a little chuckle out of me in this movie, and it's a scene where Abby, the young girl that Elektra is protecting, asks what it is that Elektra does for a living, and Elektra responds with, layoffs and payroll reduction. That feels like a Zach Penn line. The basis for her character arc I do like the idea of, and it does work well for her after everything that happened during Daredevil. It does have a bit of a Lazarus Pit feel to it, and we see her being haunted by her scattered past as she keeps finding herself having flashbacks to her childhood. I do like the idea of this because dying and coming back to life would absolutely mess you up, but they don't do anywhere near enough with it. And in a similar way, I do feel the exact same when it comes to Elektra deciding to help Abby and her father Mark. The dad's name is Mark Millar. I know there's only one letter difference, but come on. Mark Millar is a comic book writer who's worked with Marvel several times, and he's also the co-creator of things like Kingsman and Kick-Ass. But that's not important right now. I like the idea of this being the catalyst for her opening up to people and learning to care again, but this feels far too rushed, especially how protective she becomes after literally, with a bow and arrow, was going to kill them herself. They do sprinkle in a few moments between them and Elektra, so she is given a chance to actually get to know them before everything kicks off, but it's nowhere near enough time for her to actually get to know them and want to protect them. I just don't buy it. Even when it is that they seem to kind of try to push that maybe Elektra sees a younger version of herself in Abby. And there is one moment when Abby does refer to Elektra as her friend, but at this point in time, they've only met twice, and one of them, Elektra was basically threatening her. I get that she's only supposed to be 13 years old in this, so I do understand why it is that she might be a bit quicker to try befriending Elektra, but when both she and her father are on the run, and people are after them, you'd think that she'd be a little bit more cautious, or her father would be a little bit more stricter. The weakest aspect of both Mark and Abby is the actual characterisation. The performances, however, I do think are alright. Both Kirsten Zine and Goran Visnich are fine in their roles, and they do what they can. They both feel fairly natural and suit their roles pretty well. I just think that they could have done a bit more with them, especially Mark, who at one point just vanishes. Also, I think they really needed to hammer home why it is that Abby is this treasure, because bead power is kind of useless in this. But as much as I'm complaining, there is actually one character in this movie that I was so happy got included, and that is Terrence Stamp as Stick. As far as casting goes, Terrence Stamp is a brilliant choice. He's a lot kinder and more like a mentor than Scott Glenn's version was, but even so, he does get some fun moments, and I really did like him. My biggest issue with Stick is how he's used in this movie. Like Mark and Abby, I definitely think that they could have done a lot more with him. The biggest of which, in my opinion, is build on the relationship and connection that he has with Elektra, both as her mentor and as a potential father figure. We see during one of the flashbacks that Elektra's father was quite pushy and quite strict with her. And I feel like there's a missed opportunity here to give this movie a little bit of emotional weight. We could have had Stick be her mentor when she was a kid, and you see him grow to care for her like a daughter, and that would at least explain why it is that he brings her back to life. I'm really resisting the urge not to start singing Evanescence. But he can't admit that that's why he did it, and she becomes resentful and aggressive towards him because she thinks that he's trying to turn her into a weapon. There is an undercurrent to the theme surrounding kids and the relationship that they have with their fathers, and I do think that if this story element was integrated into the story, I do think that it would have helped emphasise that a bit more. Like during the final fight between Elektra and Kurigi, she has a flashback to her father telling her to keep going. And I think that it would have hit harder if it was Stick instead and they had established him in this way. You know, she's lying there, she's beaten, Kurigi's won, what's so wrong with dying? And then she realises all of the people that she still has in her life, including Stick and Matt. And that gives her the strength to carry on. That could have been really good, and it could have given this movie a bit more of an emotional punch, and I know that it works because they did the exact same thing in Spectacular Spider-Man. But those are just my thoughts. Let me know what you think. Oh god, there's so much more I still want to talk about. Let's talk about the hand. This was the first time that we had ever seen the hand brought into live action, and while they don't really get that much to do, I do like that they add a good challenge for Elektra, because unlike the hands that appeared in the TV series in Iron Fist and The Defenders, this version of the hand actually features a load of characters that have supernatural powers. The main ones that we see include characters like Stone, played by Bob Sapp, who is super strong and has hardened skin. Kinku, played by Edson T. Ribeiro, who is agile, I guess. They don't really do that much with him, to be honest. Tattoo, played by Chris Ackerman. The clue is in the name. He has tattoos of animals all along his body that he can summon into real life and control. That's kinda cool, to be fair. Typhoid, played by Natasha Malvi, who is basically a version of Poison Ivy where she can infect people and make them sick. And these four are led by Kurigi, played by Will-Yun Lee, who has a combination of psychic abilities and super speed. Oh yeah, and Elektra's got her own set of powers now, and they come out of absolutely nowhere. She basically has like a foresight vision where she can basically see like a few seconds into the future, which I think there's some kind of cool visuals that they do with it, but they don't really use it enough in this movie. And weirdly, this is exactly what Sony were planning on doing with the Amazing Spider-Man movies with Andrew Garfield. Yes, really. And I just don't think it was necessary. It doesn't add anything to this. Anyway, performance-wise, they all do what's required of them, and I do think that they each have a decent enough screen presence, and they do feel distinct from each other. But the characters themselves are very one-dimensional, and they do come across as very generic. I like that there is a bit of intrigue behind them and how they work, and the fact that they do add some variety to the movie, like action scenes and challenges for Elektra to face. But they don't do enough with them. They do try to flesh them out a little bit, especially Typhoid and Kurigi, but they don't do enough. Typhoid's backstory is given in literally just one line of dialogue, and that's it. In fact, they spend longer on her kiss with Elektra than they do fleshing her out. And when it comes to Kurigi, for some reason they've decided to tie him to Elektra's childhood. It doesn't make any sense, and they did not need to do that. Now that I'm saying this all out loud, it does sound like there is a lot that does happen in this movie. Elektra is definitely quite short compared to a lot of other Marvel comic adaptations that were coming out around the time. This movie is literally only about an hour and a half without credits, and there's no post-credit scene either. So while I do appreciate that this movie does get to the point, I do think that this film should have been a lot longer to give each of these characters, including the antagonist, a lot more time to be fleshed out and developed. And believe it or not, there actually is an extended director's cut of this movie. Now, unlike the Daredevil director's cut, I have not seen the director's cut of Elektra. By all accounts, it does sound like it is a lot more brutal, it is a lot more graphic. In fact, the movie is rated R. The theatrical cut over in the US is rated a PG-13. For us in the UK, it's rated a 12A. I'm guessing the extended cut is rated a 15 over here in the UK because I don't think that decapitations can fit within the 12A rating. It doesn't change the fact that anytime someone from the hand gets killed that they burst into green smoke. I still don't understand the reason behind that. To be fair, the death scenes in this movie, I don't really care about spoilers for this movie, so here's your warning. The death scenes for the multiple antagonists in this movie, I can't lie, some of them are actually quite funny. Like, Stone gets established as a pretty intimidating, powerful force of nature, and he gets crushed by a tree. The exact same tree that he accidentally knocks over a little bit earlier. But the funniest one by far is what happens to Typhoid. The finale for this movie takes place at Elektra's childhood home, and outside that home is this gigantic maze where her and Kurigi have their final fight. And while that fight scene's going on somewhere else in the maze, Typhoid has managed to corner Abby and she's killing her. So I do think that there could have been a really cool scene that once Elektra finishes with Kurigi, that she could go full ninja mode and they can do like a parallel to the opening sequence of this movie happy with her hunting down typhoid. No, she decides to launch her side blade at full force through several hedges, and this goes on for a good while. Then it cuts to Typhoid, who hears it, turns around, and the side blade at full speed goes thump into her face. I won't lie, that has gotten funnier with every rewatch. Look, as I said before, the performances are good, and I do think that everyone is pretty well cast. Even people like Kari Hiroyuki Tagawa as the leader of the Hand, and Colin Cunningham as Elektra's agent McCabe. But, as I said, they don't do anywhere near enough with them, and when it comes to the villains, they are dispatched disappointingly quick. And when I say that they don't do enough, that also extends to the action in this movie. It can be fun, there is some good choreography and stunt work, and there is a variety of sequences, but for an action movie, there's not as much in this as you'd think. This definitely could have done with a lot more of it, or longer sequences. Also, the editing is a bit 50-50. It's not too bad, but when it comes to some of the action sequences, it can be a little bit too fast. It doesn't really give you enough time to focus on what's going on. It gives you enough time to sort of understand what's happening, but it's just cutting. It's too fast, which does suck a little bit because there is some actually good stunt work in this movie. Jennifer Garner got properly involved in that stuff, and Will Yun Lee is a former stuntman. But I will say it can be fun, they just could have done with a bit more of it. And when it comes to the overall visual effects and CGI that is featured in this movie, I think that it is a bit mixed overall. Some stuff in this movie, I'll admit, for 2005, don't actually look too bad, and they interact with the real world pretty well. But then there's other stuff that can be a bit dated. I think some of the tattoo effects are probably the best examples of both, because it is clever, but occasionally, especially the scenes involving the wolves, it is very noticeable. But as I said, most of the effects are integrated into the real world quite well, plus it does help that this movie does try and do as much for real as possible, which I did think was quite cool. Also pretty cool is the costume that Elektra has. I mean, absolutely, this is a very impractical costume for a ninja to wear, but it doesn't look bad. Yes, okay, she looks really good in it. But one aspect of the costume that I really like is how much the red really pops on screen, and because of the material that they use, whenever she's in shadow, it almost gives her that sort of comic book ink effect. It might be just me who thinks that, but I thought it was cool. The other characters that appear in this movie, a lot of their costumes are quite generic overall, especially for early 2000s superhero movies. There's like lots of like ninja costumes and samurai robes and dark black leather jackets. There's not really much else that I can really say on those costumes, but what I will say is that at least with those costumes, I can see them fitting within the aesthetic of the 2003 Daredevil movie. If they were to appear in that movie, it would not look out of place. Now, there's one aspect of this movie that I really like, and that's the soundtrack from Christoph Beck. It sounds nothing like a superhero soundtrack, and it sounds amazing. It fits the movie and tone really well, and it helps give this movie its own unique feel and identity. It combines a mixture of Asian-inspired drum and bass themes and classical orchestration, and it works surprisingly really well. My favourite tracks from this soundtrack are DeMarco's End and Insomnia. I love those themes. I do think that this is a good soundtrack overall. I do think that it is quite memorable, and among a lot of other superhero themes, it is quite unique. And like almost every Marvel Comics adaptation of the 2000s, this movie also features a tie-in album with a load of songs that appear and were inspired by the movie. Oh, there's some good ones in this. Some of them are very much from the 2000s, but I will say that they do sound awesome, and as a complete album, I've got to be honest, I mean, I loved the Daredevil tie-in album. This, I would honestly say, is on par with that. There are some really great songs that do appear on this soundtrack, and I do think that a lot of them do deserve a little bit more attention. Like Wonder from Megan McCauley, who went on to do a song for Fantastic Four. There's a song from Taking Back Sunday, who also did a song for Fantastic Four. There really is a lot of overlap when it comes to the albums for these movies. Evanescence, 12 Stone Jet, there's some really good stuff in this. Honestly, I'm more surprised that neither Nickelback or Velvet Revolver appear in this album. They seem to do like pretty much all the 2000 Marvel films. Anyway, I really do like the album, and it is something that I do enjoy listening to. Overall, while I will say, in my opinion, that this is not as bad as it has been made out to be over the years, there is still a lot of missed opportunities, and ultimately, as an Elektra story, it is disappointing. Look, there are things that I did like and actually thought were good, like the cast, some of the CG effects and visuals, especially the opening sequence, some of the action scenes, and of course the soundtrack. But unfortunately, this does squander a lot of really good opportunities and brushes over so much of its potential. The characters are not the best, it does feel short, there is stuff missing, there isn't anywhere near enough action for this kind of movie, and unfortunately, it's just not that thrilling. There's a lot of decent ideas that I think definitely could have done with either being used more or expanded explored in some way, and that is why I think this is disappointing. For fans of Marvel and Elektra, I think this is at least worth a look just to see what it's like, and you may have some fun with it. And the same goes for casual viewers too. Don't go into this with expectations one way or another, just go into it with an open mind. It's not a great movie by any means, but there is some fun to be had, and I do kind of enjoy it. So with all that being said, my rating for Elektra is a 5 out of 10. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, this movie is a Christmas movie. Doesn't look like one, does it? Anyway, that is pretty much everything I want to say for this video, so if you have watched this video, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoy this content, please like, subscribe, and be sure to hit that notification button. If you have seen Elektra, let me know down in the comments what you think about it, plus if you have any suggestions for any future Rewind reviews you would like to see me do, let me know down below. And once again, thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you in the next video. See you guys.